diving into Lawrence's world of the Antigua research was a challenge, one that I have enjoyed so far, but this is by no means a completed paper. And I want to talk to you today about what I have been able to get out of this, where I've been able to position my mind. I have a expanded interest in the colonial silvers under my tutelage from Wynyard. So, let's go through it and bear with me. Just to put some background onto Antigua, it was colonized in 1632, and the first sugar plantation is set up by Christopher Codrington from Barbados in 1674. It's 108 square miles, a drier climate, using half of its land for sugar. Two important points on the map to put here. We have St. John's at the top, which is where our figure of this evening, Patrick Wilson, and let's just say his work in the 1730s, is going to be operating from, and English Harbour below, a very important point for hosting the British Royal Navy Caribbean Fleet. And there's the oldest illustration I can find of English Harbour. Just to go for a contemporary account of how to situate this island in your mind, this is Governor John Hunt in 1722, that Antigua, 'tis much the largest, so Antigua, as 'tis much the largest, so it is the most beautiful and best inhabited of these islands, that being the Leeward Islands, of a fruitful soil, but to be wrought with a good deal of labour, contains a great number of safe and commodious harbours, which are well defended by forts and batteries erected on them for their security. The island is very healthy, and were it not for the excessive heat of the sun, it would be in all things agreeable to life. So, no such situation there on Antigua. And searching through some auction records, that is an 18th century depiction of the view of Old Road House, an estate there for Sir William Young, Baronet. So 1792, I didn't find any indication of a domestic dwelling, the owner of silverware so far in the 1730s. But those owners would have been plantation owners, naturally, of course, many of them. This is a mid-18th century layout here of the Langford Brook plantation estate. Just rather good visuals so that we can put our minds to this place. And a little bit of the economics of Antigua to position money is moving around the world at all points, and that the history of silver is deeply connected with wider economies. Some salient points here. What I noticed while looking through some figures from Sheridan and others is that Antigua seems to have a real peak by the 1740s, and there is a small decline as we move throughout the 18th century. In Lawrence's notes, he mentions that we should think of Antigua and St. Kitts, which is 60 miles away from each other, as one sort of economic entity. And I think I come to that a little later. But Jamaica is 1,000 miles away, and that the sugar mills were 170 of them in 1705, 239 of them in 1748, then a small drop of 207 in 1789, with sugar imports getting to a high of 167,760 carat weight in 1756-60, again, some decline thereafter. And that the population was, in 1724, measured as 5,200 white people to 27,892 black and enslaved people, free people, in 1745. There's a particular note here of the White Servants Act of 1716, that there should be, essentially, one white person to every 40 black people. And that is a sort of situation I can put there of the identity of Antigua in these important middle decades of the 18th century. And if we include, and this isn't a presentation on St. Kitts, although it'll keep popping in and out as an island, that combined they had a sort of, this is Lawrence's notes, 312 carat weight export in the years 1726 to 35. Whereas Jamaica was 288. And Lawrence's notes make a lot of mention of instability in Jamaica in the 1730s, and that's for the discussion on Jamaica. It's been touched on so excellently with Luke here about the retailing, the importation of goods from the mother country, that is the United Kingdom. And there is one quote at the time from a John Kerry, the kingdom is become the center of trade, and standing like the sun in the midst of its plantations, does not only refresh them, but draws profit from them, and so indeed is a matter of exact justice that it should be so. Therefore, it makes total sense with what I'm going to come to later of how things came from London to Antigua to be sold, much has been discussed with Luke here. That perfect layout of a model is very much what we'll also be discussing here. To continue with Laurence and his work here, there's one sort of character I need to bring up before we get to the silversmiths. And that's the plantation owner, Dr. Walter Tulladeth. I haven't got an image of him or his estate, but here we go. So one of our, if you think of it, I'm going to lay out Laurence's notes of a little bit like a crime scene, and I'm trying to find out who connects to who and why. So, Walter Tulladeth. We have the 1707 Act of Union. Scottish people are able to move to the islands to work and prosper. He is definitely Scottish. He arrives in Antigua in 1726 alongside his medical practice. He is selling goods that he's brought over from London. There's some mention of him having a lot of trouble getting money out of plantation owners. So that's clearly an issue there, but he's also borrowing money to then loan out in Antigua. That seems to be an issue for Antiguans, perhaps other plantations in other islands. I don't know this yet. They're just short of cash. So he borrows at 5%, loaning for 8 to 10%. This does him very well in Antiguan society. At 1736, his marriage to Mary Burrows, the widow of John Tremels, comes 136-acre estate. Later in life, his daughter goes on to marry a baronet, and in 1757, by extending his plantation to 536 acres, he returns to Scotland, becoming an absentee, and the absentee economy is quite particular here. Most of these plantation owners at some point are not living, but are earning from their plantations. And now a little note on Laurence. I never got to meet Laurence, although we did converse via some emails at the auction house. I also never got to meet Robert Barker, but I did perform his probate documents in 2019. So I've had a deep dive from there on with Caribbean silver, continuing with my love of Indian silver from Wynyard. And what I understand is that Laurence had a great deal of trouble. And in one of his exchanges with me, where he talks about the more he has found on Charles Allen and Patrick Wilson, that he would like to have found more. He says some of the relevant years for Patrick Wilson were, frustratingly, in volumes that are either missing or too fragile to examine. The archives are in a dreadful condition. Digital intervention has begun, but it'll be a lengthy process, but much has been lost already. He wasn't kidding. I think that there's a lot of issues there, and if I were to ever get to go to Antigua to work on these things myself, I would need a lot more training and considerable doses of patience. So Laurence has clearly performed very important work here on what I've heard described as a man who would be the Garrards of Antigua, and that is Patrick Wilson. Right, there we go. So there is the death record of Patrick Wilson in 1755. We don't know when he was born, but we do know he's almost certainly going to be Scottish because of the Scottish interconnectedness of the web, the sort of crime scene that I'm trying to lay out here of who is involved in this man's business. And these legal documents that Laurence has found, digested, then I've had to digest as well to sort of put together what I'm sure Laurence would have wanted to put forward to you all and been very proud of what he found in Antigua and no doubt has saved. And we're going to move on to a bit of a diagram. Okay, so we've got lots of characters at play here. But we start over here on the left with Patrick Wilson. This is our main man. This is the business owner. This is a man of some importance in Antiguan society, and the various ways in which he cropped up I will discuss soon enough. Relating to my first character, Dr. Walter Tullydeth, there, slightly cut off, but he is, in 1734, Wilson marries Sarah Tremills, the stepdaughter of Dr. Walter Tullydeth, who dies obviously quite a bit later. So we've got an immediate connection there to a merchant man, an educated man, a member of the Scottish community, who is able to, no doubt, furnish his daughter with a dowry for marriage. So from 1734 onwards, we can presume that Patrick Wilson has access to funds. We move down now to the lower arrow. From 1735, and this is the earliest of the document, the earliest date given in the documents that Laurence found for mentioning of dealings with a supplier in London, James Inglis. I couldn't quite work out when he dies, but he's born in 1701. Inglis has a brother, Alexander, who is of St. Kitts at one point, described as a jeweler, and the brother Alexander is at one point the lawful attorney, power of attorney to act on behalf of Patrick Wilson. There's clearly a very close relationship here between the brothers Inglis and Patrick Wilson. They are both the sons of the Edinburgh silversmith Robert Inglis, and just so we have a bit of imagery, there be Father Inglis's mark. Inglis, James Inglis, is supplying from London. He does eventually end up back in Edinburgh, where he's described as late of London. More characters to come. We move up to the top, also for our supply chain here, to Henry Hancock of Blowbatter Street. An agent for Wilson, it's definitely this connection. He's mentioned as holding goods destined for Patrick Wilson in this very great big list of items supplied from James Inglis. In this list, which I'm going to get to in due course, we have much mention of Charles Allen. Allen, the two spellings there, phonetic 18th century spelling. This is almost, there's so little doubt to ever put that this is the same Charles Allen who is later in Kingston, our most important maker in the Jamaican islands. Seems from the dates that Charles Allen is working in Antigua, let's just say 1735 to 41. There's some trips in and out of London, but this is, the connection between Wilson and Charles Allen is important. I'll go on to mention more about who might be making what. And towards the very end, the last characters who are sort of lesser in this story, just before Wilson dies, John Lycett, upon the recommendation of Henry Hancock, is apprenticed to Wilson. And here we have other silversmiths working. We have George Dalzell, Scottish, almost certainly. He is a goldsmith. He's listed in 1757, after Wilson's death. He's buried in 1749, Daniel Hill, another person listed as an Antigua silversmith. Could these be the successors to the business? A point I would like to make here is that everything that I sort of gleaned from these documents is it kind of seems that Patrick Wilson died early. We don't have his birth date. I imagine, maybe he was the same age as James Inglis. But he seems to have died young. There seems to be no slowing down of his business or so forth. He was clearly just apprenticed someone, so he planned to be around for a bit longer than potentially 6 months. So those are our characters here of our crime scene investigation. And we can see examples of how Patrick Wilson, this is in The History of Antigua by Oliver, fits into quite a well-positioned part of society amongst the plantation owners. Tullydeth there on one side, and then the other connections. And there is a great amount of intermarrying through here of great families of Antigua. Right. So that's covered our characters, and now we can go a little bit more into our main man, Patrick Wilson. So there are 3 main documents that I've had to work with from Laurence, and that is, if I can summarize them rather than fully describe them, we have evidence of making it seems that Patrick Wilson would happily complain legally where necessary if customers or suppliers didn't do as they were told or didn't show up for payment, chasing payment. It seems the Antiguan economy struggled with the movement of money. So we have one where we can talk about evidence of production, which we'll come to in a second. And then these two, the most important, I think, of those, complaining that James Inglis, essentially, I've given you all this money, you were supposed to buy me all these things, I haven't had all of my things, where is my money? That's how I read that document. There was an awful lot of 18th century legal parlance, and being a dyslexic Welshman, that was not comfortable. So we're going to go for my little summaries on this. And then we have James Inglis's reply. And it's a very long document. It needs a lot of digestion. It could work very well with jewelry historians also, I should think, for the amount of jewelry listed on it, to some detail as well, including mourning rings, rose-cut garnet rings, so forth. Right. So we'll flick back and forth. So that's what the actual document, there's a corner of it, because it's too big, apparently, to photograph in one go. But at the end of this great big document, where it's essentially, yes, James Inglis is like, well, yes, I did take all this money, and I do owe you some money, so here's what I've given you so far. And go back to this. So, a bit of a chunky quote there. But what I get from this particular scenario and the salient facts we need to take out if we're looking at the silver from Antigua is that the connection here is laid out with Charles Allen, the defendant, in this case James Inglis, entrusts the said Charles Allen to get the said complainant, that's Patrick Wilson's, goods and wares made up by this defendant. It accordingly advanced the said Charles Allen the sum of £9, 13 shillings and sixpence, and did so entrust the said Charles Allen with some silver to the amount of £13, 15 shillings, both of which said sums are mentioned in the said first schedule, and there's a lot of these schedules. And this defendant further saith that the complainant, having before he left London, and then there's about this button stamp, which apparently wasn't good enough, sent back, and they disagree about the money on that. So legal complaints are precious in this, for we don't have inventories, a diagram of Patrick Wilson's workshop, but these legal complaints do survive, and they give us a very, very important window into what came to Antigua from London. That is that document. It's very, very long, so I've just taken a snippet out of it here that I think would be of the most interest to silver scholars, and there are things that we will recognize in there. The shoe buckles, the spoons are listed separately. The strainers, which we know as moat spoons, are in there. The tea-tongs, single-jointed and double-jointed. So we've got a differentiation there, and for those of us that work with small silver, we like to notice these things. And then we move down, we've got pepper boxes listed, casters, that will become more relevant later, I think. Silver-handled swords. This is, some of the most silver-based stuff for you. An awful lot of the supply is jewelry, some watchmaking elements, and what we have at the bottom here, 317 ounces and 2 pennyweights. All in all, if I tot up the various weights of what I see to be silver, this is a period of sort of 1735, 1741, at most, more likely 1736 to 39. Laurence mentions in his notes, the date just keeps jumping around. It's true. Some 1,600 ounces is making its way from Inglis to Patrick Wilson. A hefty lump. If what I believe to be, let's just say, hollowware and tablespoons of some kind that isn't listed as such. I liked this particular snippet because the pepper boxes, the kitchen peppers or those side handles, and the casters are listed separately, as well as smallware, teaspoons, and the tongs. Then we have the lump of plate at the bottom. My interpretation of this is that Inglis is needing to somehow divide up who he is going to. He is going to a teaspoon maker, a moat spoon producer who produces those items, and I need to know what I'm sending of that to pay there. I need to go to a caster maker for the pepper boxes and the casters, and you only need to look at the various apprentices of Samuel Wood in London to know exactly how caster making, like spoon making, follows a lineage. My interpretation is that this 317 ounces would be the larger items. This would be the teapots, tureens, even candlesticks. I'm imagining going to somebody like Ebenezer Coker's workshop, which I know is later than the 1730s, who is able to supply you with quite a wide gamut of hollowware for your Antigua market. It's clearly a large enterprise, as I have said. So this is the evidence we need of things being taken from London to Antigua. Sadly, as I'll come to elaborate further, there is no surviving Antiguan silverware that I can find, but I can only suggest. But onto the other side, and this is very important, I believe we discussed this today, of what was made where. So we know the Jamaican silver was made in Jamaica, thankful to that assay system and marks. We now know that the Barbadian pieces, which I'm very happy to see. Didn't know about those, that's just exciting stuff. They clearly made there. This one is what we need for proof of making in Antigua in relation to Patrick Wilson. So it's filed in the Common Pleas, April 9th, 1743, to one John Chapman. And just to read the necessary sentence here. So what Patrick is, Mr. Wilson here is asking for money for things that he has done in his line of trade. And the said Patrick, aware that he reasonably deserved to have for the said work and labour so done and performed for the said John by him and the said Patrick the sum of £20 current money of the said island, and that the necessary materials and things found and provided by the said Patrick in and about such work and labour, he reasonably deserved to have another sum of £10 like money. Valued his work highly, is how I see that. So, we have a layout here that we are producing in Antigua as well as importing. This very neatly mirrors the structure as shown by Luke. I have no doubt that the studies of American silver in great depth, as well as Jamaica, will show this happening. It is the economy of the 18th century. What I perhaps wonder is that, and more economic history is needed here for me, the decline that seems to happen in Antigua's riches coincides neatly with Jamaica's, and perhaps simply there was enough available at that time when the finances started to reduce. More relationships to Charles Allen do continue throughout these records. He is listed as, in this very, 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 very long inventory of items, the silver delivered to Charles Allen to get 2 houseman swords made, which the workman went up at 50 ounces and 5 shillings, 6 each. There is such a close working relationship between so many men in Antigua. Particularly Patrick Wilson and Charles Allen, but there is I quite like this quote a lot. So this is from one of my other great players in this story, Walter Tulladiff. He in 1736 says to Patrick Wilson on returning and saying that his shop wanted him, and I believe Mr. Allen minds his business very well, but he, Mr. Daniel Hill and Johnny Pradu, are idle and don't mind as well as they did you. So I'm quite in favour of Charles Allen in this. He's getting a contemporary vote of being very industrious. There are, in 1736, with the Antiguan Slave Rebellion, a very important legal moment here, and that is where we get our good list of the names of such silversmiths that we can work from. There is an important point to put here of, and this is how I understand this. In the Antiguan Slave Rebellion, much trials are put on of enslaved people for their role or connections or so forth in this. And just to talk about 2 brothers, Billy and Benjamin Johnson, 2 free black men who were tried at the beginning of 1737. This is from David Barry Gaspar's Bondmen and Rebels, a study of master-slave relations in Antigua. When the assembly next convened on Monday, January 24th, several white witnesses for the defense delivered testimony. They were Charles Allen, goldsmith, John Pradu, silversmith, Patrick Wilson, silversmith. And then, on January 25th, other witnesses were called into defense, Isaac Libbet. So that's the list of names that we have to work here in the 1730s. What I take from this is these are all men in working relationship. We have Tullidif's account here. You know, he's clearly met Predu and Hill and Allen with Wilson together at some point. He's able to see these people. And Benjamin and Billy Johnson, three silversmiths working alongside these men, are in their workshop. You know, these are their commercial brethren, and they are called to trial to speak on behalf of them, and they do so clearly because these are their friends, these are their working accomplices. And this, I just find it a very important moment that you know, white men are giving testimony to support black men, and I understand from reading Gaspar's account that ultimately the Acts of Antigua were overturned because slaves were called to give evidence against other slaves, and this is a topic in itself that, you know, I think deserves better articulation by a historian correctly informed on that topic. Here is the web as I see it in Antigua in the 1730s. We have all these great players headed by Patrick Wilson. We have the in, we have the out, we have three black men working. Patrick Wilson was also a slave owner. There is a document in Lawrence's findings of the sale in London after his death of an enslaved man named Edinburgh. The issue from our point of view of the silver is that we don't have any, and I struggle and therefore to connect the objects that we want to see and work with, what all these names tell us was happening in the 1730s. So I had to get creative with this bit. So, luckily, in my job, I came across this teapot, which identified the coat of arms for Philippe's, for Adolphus Philippe's of New York. And some digging into his life happened to let me stumble upon, courtesy of People Not Property, his inventory here, which lays out very usefully for us 2 silver tankards, 6 new spoons, 6 old spoons, and 1 silver teapot. The inventory taken in 1749, the teapot marked for 1749 for John Swift, so a pretty new purchase at that point. So here we have an example of London-made silver ending in a colony. This is the best example I knew of because I worked with it. I'm sure in the great studies of American colonial silvers, there will be other examples of London silver with heraldry, with an inventory that can just place it there and like, right. My imagination from this is such and such a teapot may have well made it over to Antigua in the 1730s. This is the imported product. I think it's also important to note, so on the right side of the document at the top is the silver, all at the bottom is various bits and bobs around the Philippe's estate, you know, flax spinning wheels, an old gun. But on the left-hand side is the list of 23 enslaved people. Property is very soberingly laid on one document here. Now, again, in my auction work, these fellas came my way. So they are unmarked casters of a typically 1730 to 40 date. And again, through decoding heraldry, I found this to be the crest of Admiral Edmund Lyons, who was raised to the peerage in 1856. So the crest dates to 1856 afterwards. Good. Well, actually, or 1858, because he's dead by that point. But I went back through his lineage, and we came to a very old Antiguan family, you know, going right back there to Major Henry Lyons, a member of council in Antigua in 1710. And all of these sons here, you know, this is a son of Antigua, they are all marrying into every other major family of Antigua. So the relationship to Antigua is extremely strong here. And I like to suggest that, you know, by the 1850s, these were old-fashioned items, but unmarked, that they may have been inherited through the Lyons family, and when, upon becoming a baron, he updates the heraldry on them. Now, can't know, of course. unless there happens to be a lion's inventory, but we at least know that casters did make it over to Antigua, thanks to that mention earlier of 5 casters going from James Inglis to Patrick Wilson sometime in 1736 to 39. Wouldn't it be wonderful if these were some of those? But how could I find out what they are made of? So I like, getting into metal, so I had them scanned. And what I had them scanned against to try work with this. So we can see that each of the casters there, which I happily brought here to Goldsmiths Hall, comfortably sit in the 925 range, because with 18th century metals, one must also include the silver and gold together to get your precious content for assay. What my interpretation of that is that these are London-made items, comfortably fitting to the sterling standard. But they haven't got any Antiguan items that I know of. There is sadly no PW mark out there, much as I would like there to be, as of yet. I needed to scan against something that is somehow close to this. So I did have access to, in my own collection, 2 pieces of Jamaican silver, which I've had scanned here. So that includes a little milk jug, which I'll show you in a second, which is assay marked, so that met the standard of assay for Jamaica. So this is a bit of a segue into Jamaica, but I'm afraid I can't give you an Antiguan example. And then there's also a cup and cover bearing the maker's mark of Charles Allen, who we know is very involved with this story. One of the points that I like about this is that we've got a huge mixture of metals running around these islands. Money is scarce. We're using money of the island, which is mentioned earlier for Wilson. And that's in 1728, the Spanish real is moved down to 916 standard, 11 of 12. And looking at those scanned items there, combining the silver and gold, we do get quite comfortably to 916. And something I would love to propose is that all of Robert's items are scanned in such a way to find their silver and gold content and see how much does it come to 916, or indeed if any might be more at 925 or above. I would most enjoy that. So, and that's the example of the assay marked item that was scanned. And here is said cup and cover, which will just humor me a little. We have a close working relationship between Charles Allen and Patrick Wilson, definitely. I feel like he's leaving there in about 1741, he's leaving Antigua. He clearly is well suited. I got notes quite recently, courtesy of Wynyard, that he's fitted out to the sum of £2,000 by the baronets. So he's set up to work. But what is unusual about this cup and cover is that the mark is placed over a sort of plug in the center of the base. And I haven't encountered that before, actually. We know that from a Roberts collection, we have his partnership with Campbell, this A&C mark. It's quite a big plug, actually, and that it sits on top, so he's placed it on top of something that he's plugged up. One would like to imagine, could it be the PW mark, and that this is something made in Antigua, but I think this is definitely a Jamaican item, because there is another one. Courtesy of the National Museum of Scotland, if I remember rightly, this has a provenance going back to Mrs. Howe. When you compare the two, the castings here on the handles are so similar, as well as the finial. And also, they both share a decorative element of these wonderful grotesque masks, which are wonderfully humorous. But I also I understand from Robert's collection of Jamaican silver that there are direct print sources for some of this material. And I should hope that this combination of, we don't have Antiguan silver, but if we use Jamaica to help, we can fill in the holes in this wonderful discourse of interest, much like the holes in the Antiguan documents in the archives. And just to point out that this is courtesy of Lindsay McGill at the museum, that their cup and cover is marked Thrice. much like it were in the assay system, where you would have alligator head, assay master, and maker, and that mine is only one, so I propose it may be earlier. So that is as close as I can get you. I'm going to leave him there. As close as I can get to you for what Antiguan silver may have looked like between scanning these casters, looking at heraldry, looking at other colonies, both in the Americas and the West Indies. But clearly, with Lawrence's great efforts here to get there in time to Antigua to research this, we can establish that the 1730s workshop, at least, and most certainly the 1740s of Patrick Wilson, was a great enterprise, and that it represents Antigua's silversmithing culmination, which if it follows on with Daniel Hill and George Dalzell, there is more work to go. We have a relationship to Elias Boudinot, a Philadelphia silversmith, that in Lawrence's notes to me says, while there are claims that he made in Antigua, I have not yet been able to substantiate them. There's a great amount of study here to be done, and I'm quite loving the mystery of it, of, well, I'm so used to working from object to fact, and this is a great challenge to work from primary document to object that may not even be here anymore. And it was just a great pleasure, and I'm very thankful to have been allowed to take it on. And I can only hope that from the wonderful gathering of everybody here and the combination of minds that we will develop Antigua so much more, and one day, hopefully, perhaps in a tiny little auction somewhere, a nice big cup and cover with PW on it will turn up with the same handles, and I will be most overjoyed. Thank you so much for hearing me talk about Antigua and what I have been able to deduce from Lawrence's notes and his excellent work, and to Wynyard for giving me this opportunity, and whatever I can help answer with, I shall.
I seem to spend my life up here saying thank you to everyone. John, thank you very much. It was really fun, very revelatory. And I'm going to hand it back to you, and with any luck, you'll be able to answer the questions that are put to you.
Between us both. Oh, where are we going?
Middle of the back.
This is just a thought that came to me during your talk, which was wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Martin family, huge family in Antigua, sugar, and the patriarch really liked nice things. I know this because I work with the records of that family. But they moved to New York. They moved to Long Island, and the historic home that they built in the 1760s is called Rock Hall. Excuse me, Rock Hall. And they may have. Take a look at their collection and see what silver they have is just a point for you. Thank you for your talk.
So, thank you. No, that's perfect.
John, congratulations for taking that on, because it's really a difficult job to interpret somebody else's notes. And I can imagine that they were a bit uncollated, shall we say. So I think you've done a super fabulous job there. Just two quick questions, one quicker than the other. You mentioned the name of a Scottish banker who arrives in around 1730. Walter somebody? I didn't catch the first name.
I'm Tullideth.
T-U-L-L-I-D-E-L-P-H.
Tullideth. Thank you very much. The other was, I was astonished by the ratio you said of white people to enslaved people on the island, which I think you said was about 1 to 40.
Yes, that's the White Servants Act. So that would, as far as, this is in Sheridan, as I understand it, there was a heavy fine for not having enough white servants to enslaved people. And it was, from my reading, purely a form of control.
Now, do you, or does anybody else in the room maybe have an idea whether that was the normal sort of ratio throughout the Caribbean islands, or was there no such thing as a normal ratio?
I can't say it was normal, but it was, for a number of them, that was the reality. Barbados is different in that it held on to and grew its enslaved population in situ, so it wasn't that, that sort of ratio, but yeah, that was the reality in a number of places. And you spoke already to the high prevalence of absentee landlords, which was a definite pattern once they made progress with their properties for a certain amount. And Edith, maybe do you have more you could add to that?
So I'm a historical archaeologist. I work in Antigua, and I work with those collections, so it broke my heart seeing the boxes open there, and I feel your pain.
Yeah.
Yes, as I feel a deep kinship. So yes, in Antigua and Bermuda, the ratio is, that law is definitely being enacted such that there has to be one white man or two white women for each 40 enslaved people. And that is gotten around by indenturing orphan children white orphan children in England and shipping them to the Caribbean as apprentices to make that law, to fulfill that law. And it's very common in Antigua. And the second part of that is, as far as absenteeism, when you hit the 1760s, many, because they're second or third generation plantation owners by that point, they're going back to England. The sons go back to be educated at English universities and stay.
And that fits perfectly for Teledif leaving in 1757.
Thanks. I've got two questions, if that's all right, but for three of the people who presented papers. So feel free, Catherine and Luke, to jump in. So the first one is about critical fabulation. I think Catherine started us off in thinking about the necessity to engage our imagination and engage the sources to imagine where there are absences and silences. And I think Luke gave us some, at least three. It'll be interesting to see if you have any other examples, Luke, 3 mid-journey images. And then I think you also invited us to imagine what the experiences, especially of these enslaved craftspeople, would have been like. Are there any tips or guidelines or learnings that you may have had in thinking about those? How do you imagine where there are silences? What are some of the ethical or frameworks that you might have used? And the second one is about apprenticeship, or at least training to be craftspeople.
Can I interrupt 1 second? We're going to have a panel discussion at the end with all the speakers on the panel. So you might be able to address these questions to the panel as a group.
Okay.
Because save having to dot around the room to try and answer the questions you're asking now. They're really relevant questions, and I want you to ask them. Don't misunderstand me.
Can I just say my second question, and then you can answer it when we get to the panel?
Address it to John, but otherwise leave it for the panel, please.
Okay, so John, a question then.
Hello.
It was about apprenticeship. Especially as you mentioned in the 1737 revolt in Antigua, I think it was Charles Allen acting as a character witness for the 3 brothers. I don't remember if you mentioned
So yeah, Benjamin and Billy Johnson, 2 free black men working in the workshop. Charles Allen, John Prédu, Patrick Wilson, and Isaac Libbert are all called as witnesses for the defense. They're defending these 2 men. So clearly they work alongside them and are able to give character reference that, no, they did not partake in the 1736 Slave Rebellion. We work with these men, we vouch for them. That is my reading of this.
Was there any other indication of any other interaction with the black craftsmen and the owner of those workshops, apart from those testimonies?
With the documents that Laurence has, no. This is me providing extra bits to show where we get these names from, is because it lists them as goldsmith and silversmith. Lawrence's great big discoveries are these legal documents of you owe me money, where's my goods? The connection to Benjamin and Billy Johnson, I do not know if there is more. I would hope so. But there may be a complete dearth of information surviving them beyond this.
Anybody else? Right, in which case I'm going to say thank you very much again, John.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Well timed. Well everything.